Sicily, October 1347. 12 Genoese galleys enter the harbour of Messina, where sailors can barely stand on their feet, their bodies covered with black swellings the size of apples, oozing pus and blood. Most of the crew are already dead, and the rest will die within 3 days. But the cargo has already been unloaded, the rats have already fled the ships, and the fleas have already sunk their teeth into the skin of the dock workers. And the greatest catastrophe in human history begins. Over the next 5 years, 1 in every 3 Europeans will die, in some cities up to 90% of the population, totaling 75 to 200 million people worldwide. This isn't just an epidemic, it's a complete collapse of civilization. But the most horrifying part is what no one understood in 1347. They themselves had created the perfect conditions for this catastrophe, where every architectural decision, every social norm, and every religious custom had turned medieval cities into perfect incubators of death. And archaeology shows that they could have prevented it, but they didn't know how. Today, we know the culprit is the bacterium Yersinia pestis. But in 1347, microbes didn't exist in people's consciousness, since the microscope wouldn't be invented for another 300 years, and germ theory wouldn't appear for another 500 years. A medieval doctor could only observe the symptoms of the disease's various forms. The bubonic form manifested through painful swelling of lymph nodes, buboes, in the groin, armpits, and neck, ranging from the size of a walnut to an orange, which turned black due to subcutaneous hemorrhaging, accompanied by fever above 104 degrees Fahrenheit with delirium and convulsions, leading to death within 3 to 5 days in 60 to 80% of those infected. The pneumonic form was characterized by coughing up bloody sputum and progressive suffocation, causing death within 24 to 48 hours with a mortality rate of nearly 100%. The septicemic form caused extremities to turn black due to necrosis, hence the name Black Death, and caused death within 24 hours with 100% mortality. But where this came from, medieval scientists were completely stumped and couldn't find the answer. Official 14th century medicine explained the plague through several concepts that turned out to be deadly. The miasma theory proposed the existence of bad air, and the Paris medical faculty in 1348 officially declared that the cause lay in a conjunction of planets that produced vapors poisoning the air, proposing as a solution to avoid foul smells, which made people avoid the sick and corpses, but not rats, not fleas, and not poor sanitation. The Church preached the theory of divine punishment, claiming this was retribution for sins, and proposed as solutions prayers, processions, and self-flagellation. But archaeological data from London shows that mass religious gatherings accelerated the disease's spread by 3 to 5 times. The most dangerous theory blamed Jews, lepers, and foreigners for poisoning wells, which led to the burning of over 200 Jewish communities and the murder of thousands in pogroms. And archaeology of Jewish cemeteries in Germany shows mass burials from 1348 to 1349, not from plague, but from violent death. None of these theories worked, because no one could see the real enemy, a microscopic bacterium. Modern archaeozoology and DNA analysis from mass graves reveal the truth that the plague didn't just appear randomly. Medieval cities were literally designed for its spread. Excavations in London as part of the Crossrail project, 2013 to 2015, uncovered multiple plague burial sites spanning different epidemic periods. At the Bedlam burial ground, archaeologists excavated over 3,500 skeletons, dating primarily from 1569 to 1738, including many victims of the Great Plague of 1665, not the original Black Death. However, at a separate site in Charterhouse Square, the team discovered 13 skeletons in neat rows, confirmed to be from the original Black Death pandemic of 1348 to 1349. Analysis of these medieval remains showed the critical conditions that made plague so deadly. Overcrowding with 100+ people per house, appalling sanitation with excrement in the streets, a ratio of 5 to 10 rats for every person, and fleas thriving in the filth and rags, turning medieval cities into a paradise for Yersinia pestis. Archaeological analysis shows the disease spread in clear phases. In the first phase, in port districts over 2 to 3 weeks, rats from ships infected port rats, and fleas began actively multiplying. In the second phase, in city quarters over 1 to 2 months, rats died from plague, after which hungry fleas moved to humans and infected them through bites. In the third phase, over several days, some infected people developed pneumonic plague, which spread person to person through coughing, causing exponential growth in cases. And in the fourth phase of total collapse over weeks, mass death of the population occurred. Excavations in Avignon show that 62% of the population died in 6 weeks. In Florence, 60,000 out of 100,000 residents died in 4 months. And in some monasteries, not a single person survived. Archaeological studies of medieval houses show a typical picture of dwellings from that time. 3 to 4 story structures with wooden floors and thatched roofs, where numerous cracks in the walls created the perfect environment for rats. Excavations of cellars show a layer of garbage and feces 20 to 28 inches thick, with rat burrows everywhere and a concentration of over 1,000 fleas per square meter, creating ideal conditions for carrier reproduction. Medieval city streets were only 6 to 10 feet wide, with a complete absence of any sewage system, where slop was dumped straight out of windows and dead animals rotted in the streets for months, removed by no one. Churches and cathedrals, with their mass gatherings where thousands of people congregated in enclosed spaces, created the perfect environment for spreading the pneumonic form of plague through droplet transmission. Archaeology of mass graves reveals the horrifying truth about how traditional funeral rites, which required last rites, an individual grave in a coffin on consecrated ground, completely collapsed under the onslaught of catastrophe. Excavations in London's West Smithfield district show bodies stacked in piles 5 to 6 layers deep, without coffins and often without shrouds, where children and adults lay mixed together, sometimes even upside down, because the speed of death exceeded the speed of burial so dramatically that traditional rites became physically impossible. Pope Clement VI was forced to consecrate the Rhône River by special decree, so that bodies could be dumped directly into the water without standard burial, and archaeological data from Avignon shows that 11,000 plague victim bodies were recovered from the river bottom. Excavations of medical instruments show what methods doctors used in attempting to cope with the epidemic. Lancing buboes was performed with a knife or red-hot iron without any anesthesia or sterilization, which gave about a 5% survival rate, while bloodletting to remove bad blood only weakened patients and hastened their death. Herbal poultices were the only partially effective remedy that could ease symptoms, but didn't cure the disease itself or stop its progression. The famous plague doctor mask, with its distinctive bird beak shape, would not be invented until almost 300 years later, in 1619, by French physician Charles Delorme, and was never actually worn during the Black Death of 1347. This is one of history's most persistent myths. During the actual 14th century pandemic, physicians had no such protective equipment. The beak mask, filled with aromatic herbs and designed to protect against miasmas, only appeared during later 17th century plague outbreaks. Though it has become an iconic symbol of the Black Death in popular culture, Medieval plague doctors treating the original pandemic wore no such distinctive costume. This anachronistic image, while striking, represents a later era's attempt to combat recurring plague outbreaks, not the desperate medical reality of 1347. Archaeology and historical records show the massive consequences of plague for all spheres of social life. In the economic sphere, fields were abandoned, crops rotted in the fields, plague was followed by famine, and inflation reached catastrophic levels of 300 to 400%, completely destroying the established system of trade and production. In the legal sphere, laws ceased to function. Contracts were broken unilaterally, inheritance was contested in endless disputes, and courts simply stopped operating due to the death of judges and plaintiffs. Chronicles describe the destruction of family ties with the words, "Father abandoned son, wife abandoned husband, brother didn't recognize brother." And excavations of family burials often show one common grave for an entire family, where all its members died almost simultaneously. The city of Ragusa, modern-day Dubrovnik, in 1377, pioneered the world's first formal quarantine, initially requiring 30 days of isolation for ships and travelers from plague-affected areas. Venice later extended this to 40 days, giving us the term quarantine, from the Italian quaranta giorni, 40 days. But the problem was that rats and fleas, the actual disease carriers, passed through quarantine along with people and goods, undermining the effectiveness of these measures. Burning the clothing of the infected was a partially effective measure, but no one thought to burn bedding, mattresses, and other household items where fleas were hiding, preserving the source of infection. Juniper and aromatic herbs were burned in squares and streets to purify the air, but the smoke from these fires mainly repelled mosquitoes, having no effect whatsoever on fleas, which were the true carriers. Wealthy townspeople fled from cities to villages, but took with them clothing with fleas, servants who were already infected, and provisions with rats in their wagons, which led to rapid spread of the disease to rural areas that had previously remained relatively safe. Archaeological data from Polish cities shows an interesting and important pattern. Cities with Jewish quarters suffered significantly less from plague than cities without them. The reason wasn't mysticism or sorcery, but strict requirements of Jewish religious hygiene. Jewish laws required mandatory hand-washing before each meal, regular ritual bathing of the entire body, immediate isolation of the sick from healthy community members, quick burial of the dead within 24 hours, and strict prohibition of accumulating garbage and waste in living spaces. These measures accidentally created an effective sanitary barrier against fleas and slowed the disease's spread. But instead of studying and adopting these practices, the Christian population accused Jews of witchcraft and poisoning wells, staging brutal pogroms. The plague didn't just come to Europe, but engulfed virtually the entire known world of that time, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. In the Middle East, Cairo lost 40% of its population, and excavations show mass burials near mosques, where bodies were placed in common pits without observing traditional Islamic burial rites. In North Africa, entire cities were emptied and completely abandoned by residents, becoming ghost towns that never recovered their previous population levels. In India, crucial trade routes died, and complete economic collapse of entire regions occurred, changing the balance of power in the region for centuries to come. In China, the population decreased by 30 to 40%, which radically changed the demographic picture of the region and led to large-scale social transformations comparable to those in Europe. This was the first truly global pandemic in human history, which recognized no borders, religions, or social status. After the plague, Europe became completely different in many fundamental ways that determined its development for centuries to come. In the economic sphere, the catastrophic labor shortage led to wages rising 3 to 5 times, which caused the gradual collapse of the feudal system and marked the beginning of early capitalism with wage labor. In the religious sphere, a deep crisis of faith caused by the Church's inability to stop the pestilence was accompanied by the rise of mysticism and heretical movements, which became one of the most important prerequisites for the beginning of the Reformation and led to significant weakening of the Catholic Church's political power. In the medical sphere, the first systematic scientific dissections of human bodies began to study anatomy and causes of death, which laid the foundation for the scientific approach in medicine and the development of practical quarantine measures based on observations. Archaeological finds show a radical shift in art themes. Before the plague, art was predominantly religious, depicting paradise scenes and saints in bright colors, and after the plague, the main theme became grim dances of death, depictions of skeletons and decomposition processes, because death became the central theme of European culture and worldview. Modern archaeogenetics has managed to extract and analyze DNA of the bacterium Yersinia pestis directly from the teeth of medieval plague victims, which has led to a series of important scientific discoveries. The plague hasn't disappeared from nature, but continues to actively circulate in wild rodent populations on all continents to this day, preserving the potential threat of new outbreaks. Modern antibiotics show high effectiveness against plague, but only when applied in the earliest stages of the disease, before severe complications develop. Plague outbreaks continue to occur in various regions of the world. In Madagascar in 2017, there were 2,400 confirmed cases with several dozen deaths, and in the US, between 1 and 17 cases are registered annually, mainly in western states. The bacterium Yersinia pestis is officially classified by international organizations as a potential Category A biological weapon due to its high contagiousness and lethality, which requires special safety measures when working with it. The COVID-19 pandemic clearly showed that humanity continues to repeat the same fundamental mistakes that were made during the Black Death. We see the same mass denial of the reality of the threat in early stages, the same active spread of conspiracy theories, the same application of ineffective measures based on unverified assumptions, and the same social stigmatization of the sick and at-risk groups. Problems of population overcrowding in poor neighborhoods, unsanitary conditions in megacity slums, lack of access to quality medical care for millions of people, and deep social inequality create the same conditions for infection spread as in medieval cities. The paradox is that now we know precisely about the existence of microbes, understand transmission mechanisms, and have effective medical technologies, but we still continue to repeat many mistakes of the past due to political, economic, and social factors. The Black Death didn't just kill a third to half of Europe's population in a few years. It completely destroyed the entire medieval world with its feudal system, the Catholic Church's absolute political power, and deeply rooted belief in divine order and the immutability of social hierarchy. From the ashes of this unprecedented catastrophe were gradually born the cultural and scientific Renaissance, the great scientific revolution of the 16th to 17th centuries, the first legally established rights of workers and peasants, the foundations of modern medicine, and developed systems of public hygiene and sanitation. The plague taught humanity several fundamental truths that remain relevant today. Invisible, microscopic enemies are the most dangerous of all. Religious faith and prayers cannot stop a real epidemic without practical measures. The scientific method and empirical observations are the only real weapon against disease. And basic hygiene and sanitation save more lives than any other medical interventions. When you wash your hands with soap before eating, get vaccinated against dangerous diseases, or voluntarily isolate at the first symptoms of illness, you're consciously or unconsciously using survival lessons that were paid for with approximately 200 million human lives. The Black Death killed more people in 5 years than all major wars, crusades, and conquests of the 14th century combined. But it also irreversibly killed the Old World, where epidemic diseases were perceived exclusively as inevitable punishment from gods or demons, and gave birth to a fundamentally new world where we learned to fight infections through rational scientific knowledge and practical medical technologies. The Vikings managed to defeat deadly Arctic cold through thoughtful survival strategies and engineering solutions, and humanity ultimately defeated the plague through accumulated scientific knowledge and medical development. But the real enemy is still alive and active in nature. And the next major pandemic is not a question of if it will happen, but only when exactly it will begin.